San Diego game for roles actually to get going. A lot of the activity, the dialogue up until then was very contextual and character establishing, and not so much, um, adverse. But let's see. So there was actually the roles, which both of them all involved like horse riding and gunshots and stuff like that. So whatever you do in those circumstances, I dive for cover, I try to get out of there versus, we try to do this. I'm going for this. I'm gonna find my kid, or whatever,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Um, it's already in this fraught situation. Now that changed in the second session of the San Diego game. Then the players started doing things that were highly individualized per character,
Okay.
so that hypothetically someone else playing that same character in that situation might well have done something completely different.
Right. Right.
And both of the players did that. So all of a sudden I found it, I'm rolling, no pun intended, I'm rolling with the roles that they are, driving into. Um,
Yep.
so that happened in that game. In the Galactic game, which requires a little more kind of short scenes with hard frames,
Hmm. Hmm.
because of all the different acting entities and because of all the different, um, you know, kind of everything that happens sort of recontextualizes everything else. So it's
Yep.
better to just clip to, well, okay, I guess you guys are over in the, um, you're in the hive base now, and this is happening. This is what it looks like. Um, but even so, I've noticed that the characters are again becoming more direct and opinionated about the situation as a whole, and so therefore they're putting into action stuff that they want to do, so that what we're rolling about isn't really anything that even I'm providing more context for the larger social situation, but the precise actions and activities that they get up to are becoming more player based.
Okay.
So
That
that's
makes
what's
sense.
happening in those games.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
and I guess that's more or less what I anticipated.
Hmm.
I'm kind of curious about your second chapter, not as a criticism, because again, you mentioned saying to your players, "Hey guys, I'm doing all the conflicts here," um, but really, since there's no reason to say it's got to be 50-50 players to GM, there's no reason why skewing it GM wise or player wise is good, right? So I understand your point of just pointing it out as a feature, but on the other
Right.
hand, it's not like there's some special balance or arrangement of it that matters. So, given that I'm not saying it as a criticism, it is a matter of some theoretical interest to say, what are you doing in that second chapter?
Right.
How is it
Exactly.
set
Yeah.
up? How are you guys playing it? I mean, 3 sessions in, that's a fair amount of hours of play to actually look at. So,
Yes. Yeah.
whatever it may be. You just have to think about that.
Yeah.
Um, cool.
Mm.
So
Um,
let's see. Is it my turn for a question?
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. So here's one that I am dying to ask somebody. Let's take the player character who has lasted the whole way through.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, 50 words to start.
Yes.
How many words are we talking about roughly, and what has happened? What does that look like? What's the document look like now? What's in it?
So we have we because our sessions this gets I guess a little bit of a house rule because our sessions were a little if it felt shorter than what the than what the pool file kind of suggested. We've added the 15 words every 2 sessions,
Ah,
so it isn't maybe as much uh, as it would be if we did every session, obviously. Um, but yeah, let me actually pull this up so I can. I should have done this prior to this, but just so I can talk about it with some
Mm-hmm.
uh, clarity. Um, and I've been keeping them. I've been keeping my version of the updated ones for the most part up to date on my document, but some of it has kind of spread over various things. I've got some of the 15 words like on like text messages,
Right.
and which I haven't. So I don't think I've included the last 15 words onto this. And then
What I
I
hate is when they send me like, "Hey, I'm thinking of putting this in," and then I dutifully go and put it in, and then they're like, "Oh no, I didn't use that. I did this instead." I'm like, "God damn it!" you know?
yeah, and it's like I
I mean, why are you checking with me?
uh,
It's not about whether it's okay, right? Write what you want.
so and now that you mentioned, I'm like, oh, I should have kept. Now that you mentioned, I'm like, oh, there's a much better ways for me to keep track of this. If I knew you were going to ask me that, I would have been able to kind of visualize this better. But what it's like is we with the character, his name is Jean Jacques, and he has the additions are mostly in response to solidifying things that we have seen or that have happened and wanting to bring that into his character. So for example, the big one is, you know, he you know, as part of his original 50 words, he had a enchanted horse, but in in the events of the first chapter, he both gained a protege who and also managed to enchant a dragon. So both the protege and the dragon become part of the story, and the horse gets deeded to the protege.
Right.
So now the enchanted horse is so it's sort of shuffling that around, and that's the bulk of the new words, sort of so
Mm-hmm.
adding in new things. Um, Something else
Although
is that
there
he
is a change to an existing thing too, which
and
is
change to the
yeah,
horse. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's what you mean. Yeah, and then also um, a reversal on some of the earlier things comes into because he was went from one of his original 50 words was that he's hopeful to a fault, but the last sentence I have here is slowly he's becoming more political about his decision making.
Right. Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
this sort of
One thing
um,
I've noted, if do you mind if I say,
okay, go
one
ahead. Yeah,
thing I've noted about this is that you can end up therefore with past traits and present ones. And
yeah,
I find that that is very fruitful because you can say, I in the beginning, I love the sorceress Daphne with all my heart. And 3 or 4 sessions later, we see that your story says, I loved the sorceress Daphne with all my heart, but now I hate her. I hate her very guts, right? And so you have two traits now, where you had one, but both are still usable as traits, right? You could,
yeah,
in the fullness of time, act upon your former love for Daphne,
yep.
and that would be fine. And I think that's something that um, I really would like to illuminate to people so that Jean Jacques could, in fact, ride the enchanted horse if the exigencies
Oh,
of
yeah,
the moment, right, all the hassles of the moment land him with his former horse, with the
yeah,
wounded protege and the dragon, chasing another dragon over the mountain or whatever. And he says, I leap upon my old horse and, it's going to take me, and so he gets, and that trait still underlines there, even if it belongs to his protege, and it says so in the story, doesn't mean it's not still his trait. It is the trait in the story. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing for for traits that get changed too often. I mean, changed in their context, they are still available.
Yep.
And I think that's a worthwhile point about that stuff. So okay, that answers my question. As a
And
minor, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I will just, and there's one way, and there was just one, and then he also added in, just to kind of give the full range of things, using a couple words, he added in, with some of the extra words after his, I think maybe this is part of the second set of words he added, adding in, he is a fluent linguist, which is interesting because that wasn't something we had seen from the character, and it wasn't something that was sort of built into his history necessarily before then, but it sort of makes sense, and also kind of kind of fictionally wise, it's just like, well, we just hadn't seen it yet.
Exactly. I
So
think that's
so
also quite
it's
valid. Yeah.
yeah, it's a very interesting kind of, but I think that there's probably other things you can do, but I think we're seeing in his character kind of a lot of
You're
different
seeing,
ways you
yeah,
can
we're
use
seeing
the
quite a
words.
range there, which I
Yeah.
think is great. One thing I found in the games I've played so far is when people crank about only 50 words, one thing I point out is that, look, when you see a character in the very first adventure that they have in any kind of fiction, you don't see everything they can do in the first couple
Yeah.
of, the first chapter or two of the story. You learn more about what they can do as they go along. And so think about this as sort of the first pass of what we get to see at first. There's lots more
Mm-hmm.
we could see. The fact that you get a better feel for the character and what other things that you now think they logically could do or would be appropriate. And so, what if it's front loaded? So, what if all of a sudden it would be really, really good if your character, you know, knows how to use a knife? Well, guess what? Isn't that great when we suddenly realize, hey, our guy can use a knife?
Yeah.
That's good. What's wrong with that? Go ahead, enjoy it, right? And, and,
Yeah.
and I think the pool is kind of made for that level of enjoyment of what protagonists can do out of the blue
Yeah.
or semi out of the blue.
Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. So yeah, some interesting development, and it's been, I think that part of it has been really embraced by the player.
Excellent. It sounds like it has for sure. As an aside, I will complain that I have found character or players, not all of them, but some players strangely reluctant to use their words. And that option that, I mean, because I've done 15 words per session, no matter how long the session was.
Mm.
And I have found players often, some people, saving them to use in 30-word chunks. And I'm kind of going, it's actually going to be harder with 30 words than it is with 15 rather than easier.
Yeah.
So if you're
Yeah.
having some sort of kerfuffle in your head about it right now, it's only going to get worse. You don't kick it down the road, okay? So I'm actually don't really like that wait for another session rule in the rules. I'm kind of almost like, use your fucking words, use them more, is kind of
Yeah.
that's where my inclinations go.
Yeah. I was telling them they can't save him. I didn't
Yeah,
even think it through. I was just like,
yeah. I
I
mean,
don't want to remember.
yeah, it's true. That's a good point. But then, so with you, it's kind of mix and match. You're every second session, and then but use them when you get them.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
So anyway, all that stated, what's your next question?
So my next question, and this may be too basic, but do you do you play the NPCs any differently than you would as if you were game mastering, for example, like Champions Now or Sorcerer? So, because I think of those games as having kind of
Champions Now,
they
Sorcerer, and Troll Babe.
yeah. So it's within that family
And
of
Circle of Hands. I mean, really, I mean, it's the
yeah.
way it's my comfort zone is to play them as extremely active and also busy off screen. When we don't see
Yes,
them,
yeah,
they
yeah,
are up to things. They're
yeah.
doing stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
That so my comfort zone too. So I've been doing that, and I feel it works pretty well. Um, although I maybe have I think in this current the current segment, I think the one of the players may be having an issue with the NPCs being a little bit too driven,
Mm-hmm.
and wishing they were a little more malleable. But uh,
Yeah,
and
maybe. Um,
and I just ask, is have you noticed that with the kind of given that that's how you're running the NPCs, have you noticed that the potential for the perhaps greater potential for the players to kind of reach into the NPCs with the monologue of victory
I see.
has has been notable in some way, or has that made a difference to your thinking about it, or do you see a
Yeah,
or does
let
that
me think
question
about
make
this.
sense?
Yes, and then
Okay.
let me think about this because we actually haven't started touching on what a monologue of victory actually does
Oh,
in our games. But
right, right.
to go to the NPC question, I'm trying to stay really concrete with what's actually happened in play. Now, in the Galactic Peace game, I have mostly focused my attention on the groups, the different groups of different aliens. So I have a strong idea of what that group collectively will be doing or oriented toward, but not much prep in terms of specific individuals. A little bit,
Okay. Yep.
but not much. And the only ones I've really focused on are the ones that were mentioned in one of the player characters'
Okay.
stories as having
Interesting.
very specific points of view. Otherwise, I actually have been playing relatively responsively. I'll say something like, well, one of them is assigned to work with you.
Hmm.
In fact, I think it was due to um, Jerry taking the monologue of victory when he suggested that there be independent multi group teams to investigate the bomb. So he had casually tossed off that, the Hiver would work with one of the Loka.
Hmm.
So he ended up uh, so by ipso facto we ended up with an individual Loka interacting directly with Hiver.
Right, right.
So therefore, if you want to think about that in terms of malleability, certainly I've set it up so that I will sort of have to give the dude a voice, and that's not very prepped. I just have a general idea of the range of views among the Loka and their cultural context.
Right. That makes
Um,
sense.
and so, in some ways, now I'm not going to be in the situation where I just let whatever the player says sort of shape the character, into what they say, because I actually don't think that's very good practice. Um, I do, however, that those individuals, and there have been several in the Galactic Peace game, those individuals become affected strongly and individually by the roles that they're involved in.
Sure. That makes sense.
The best example, the most
Yep.
automatic one, is the newly created Hiver ambassador, who is now, hippified beyond belief by all of the hallucinogens that Dukan pumped into the ambassador making vat. So, I mean that's kind of given. I mean that this ambassador is going to be a very deeply different individual from what they would have been without that
Yep.
role in place. That's just a really extreme example, but I think softer versions of that are common in that game.
Right. Right. That makes
The
sense.
individuals, however, in the Frogpool Fantasy were very, very distinctive.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and driven in different ways and have very different priorities.